is to walk through typical project, the entire life cycle, and then all the stakeholders who are involved.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Gentle Art of Crushing It ROI edition. My name's David Lyons and I'm your host today. In these episodes, we discussed all things retail, office, and industrial real estate, helping you, the listener, invest in these asset classes and live life on your terms. So today I'm super stoked to be interviewing Deepak Bhavi. Deepak is developing multi-tenant flex spaces. We'll get into exactly what these spaces are, but for now, just think of smaller industrial spaces for contractors and such to rent out. It's a super interesting niche with a lot of interest from tenants these days, as well as investors due to their outsized demand and return potential on these investments. So really excited for Deepak to break down what this asset class looks like and then what he's doing developing this type of asset. So with that, Deepak, welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, David. I'm thrilled to be on the show too. And I'm always very excited to talk about flex space. It's my favorite thing to talk about in the world. And so very excited to share all my knowledge and experience about this very niche asset class with your listeners.
Awesome. So before we dive into the multi-tenant flex space and exactly what that is, can you give us an overview of your background and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. Allowed to. So if you can guess from my accent, maybe I have a little bit of an accent still. I grew up in Mumbai, India, which is the business capital of India. And I come from a lower middle class family. And when you grow up in a resource constrained environment like that, you learn to adapt. You learn to innovate frugally. In back home, we have this word called jugaad. In India, in the US, we might know that term as hacking, right? Using tools, information to come up with solutions with very little resources. So I'll give you an example of that. So when I was in middle school, I went to my dad and asked him like, "Hey, Dad, I need some pocket money. I need some pocket money to hang out with my friends. Can you give me some?" And my dad told me like, "Go earn your own money." And so that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. And what I ended up doing was I went to work for a bicycle shop in my neighborhood who would rent these bicycles to kids and grown-ups to do their small chores. And so I went worked with them for a few months and saved up some money. And then after a few months, I was able to buy my own bicycles and then do this rental business on the side. And so that was my source of pocket money in those days. So I did that for a couple of years. It turned out great. But then as I got into high school, my dad told me like, "Okay, you made your point, you made your money. I get it. You need to focus now on your academics." And so I sold off the business to another kid, and I was solely focused on academics since then. I went to the University of Mumbai to get my degree in computer science, and right thereafter, I went to work for a software offshoring company. Maybe your listeners have heard about these companies, Infosys and TCS and a lot of these Indian offshoring companies who work with US clients to be able to offshore some of their business processes into India. So I was a software developer at one of these offshoring companies. And after about a year, my US client, which was a major oil and gas company, asked me to relocate to California to come and shepherd some of their software development projects. And so that's how I arrived in the United States in about 2005. So for the next 5 6 years, I continued doing that kind of work in different industries, insurance and auto and all these different spaces. But I knew at the back of mind something was lacking. That entrepreneurship bug, the thing of wanting to do something of my own, was always at the back of my mind. So with that intent, I decided to go to business school. I went to business school at the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business. That's where I got my business degree. And after getting my MBA there, I was fortunate to be hired by one of our alumni into a late stage telecom startup. It was a great opportunity because I was being hired as a management trainee, which meant I would be able to work with all the senior management folks, even in the C-suite, shepherding projects for them. And it was a great opportunity to learn working hand in hand with these senior folks. So I ended up doing that for a few years, and it turned out to be a great decision to work for this late stage startup, because once we went public, it was a great financial outcome for every involved, including me. So once, but it also meant I was out of a job then when that event happened. So I was thinking about what I want to do next, and around the same time is when I started getting interested in real estate, and I wanted to invest my wealth in generating a passive income while I was exploring what I wanted to do next. And that's when I started coming across these different asset classes, multifamily, um, and single family and as such. But one asset class really caught my eye, which was the multi-tenant flex space. So I ended up investing on a couple of such projects through friends and other operators, and it started to give me a window of opportunity into how these flex space projects were being developed from the ground up, the leasing, the whole life cycle of one of these. And when I was to get my return check back from these guys, after the end of the 3 year period, I was astounded to see the kind of returns these guys were able to provide. And that really caught my attention. And so in 2020, so last year, I decided to go full time into it and start my own real estate development company and do my own flex space projects. So that's my
That's
brief
awesome. That's a great
story
story.
from all the way from India to doing flex space today.
I really appreciate it. And there's a couple of things I especially like from your story. First one is the story of you in India as a kid, renting bicycles essentially to make money. And I think what I like about that is, you have the entrepreneurship bug, and I can relate to that. And all of us who have that, we know it. And we're never really satisfied until we're creating something of our own. And usually you can trace that back to childhood, right? You found a way to make money. And so I think that's fascinating. And the second part is I like your story of how you kind of transitioned into real estate. It's not like one day you decided to just develop industrial real estate. You started by investing passively, and it allowed you to learn, what these projects look like, how lucrative they can be. And so I think that's an important thing, is just following your interest. You don't have to know the end goal or the end where exactly how you're going to get to where you're going to get, but just following your interest and seeing where that brings you. What kind of project were you investing in? Were they new development like you're doing now, or were they buying existing buildings that were already generating income?
These were, so I always invested in ground up development. So starting
Okay.
from buying a piece of land, developing it, doing the construction, leasing it up, and then selling it off. So those are the only kind of projects that I have invested in. Maybe it's by accident, but the returns justified the risk. Development, any kind of real estate development is inherently risky because you're taking a bet against time. And the people who invest in that kind of a project need to be aware of that. Like, it is inherently risky. It's definitely more riskier than a value add project, for sake of comparison. And but the returns also justify the additional risk that you're taking on. But risk means different things to different people. As long as you can figure out ways to manage risk, people think that it is a doable thing, doable project. And I happen to fall on that spectrum. I feel the risk is manageable, and especially when doing a real estate development ground up project. And so that's the only kind of projects that I am interested in doing.
That's awesome. And development's always been interesting to me. I like that you pointed it's a higher risk because it is, and it's necessary to understand that. But it's also, I imagine, incredibly rewarding to just be building something from the ground up and know that that building's there because of you, essentially.
Yeah, the other
So
thing I would
Deepak,
add is the other thing I would add, David, is also, even if you wanted to do value add flex space, it's really hard to find these assets. It's not like,
mhm,
compared to multifamily, where there's a lot of inventory, or even self storage, there's a lot of inventory of these older buildings, different projects that you can, find and turn around and add some value for yourself and your investors. Flex, especially multi-tenant flex, is such a niche. There's very little uh, properties out there that you'll be able to find. I am in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and if I were to decide and say, hey, I want to do value add flex from now on, it would still be very hard to locate these kind of projects. So it's really hard right now, and that kind of
sure,
it
sure.
justifies the value of doing ground up developments in this niche space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can you give an overview for the listener about what multi-tenant flex is, what that asset looks like, the size of the space, the configuration, and just help us understand what that looks like?
Absolutely. I know I will be a little unfair to the listeners here, that we haven't talked about what exactly is this multi-tenant flex space, what this asset class is, before we actually started talking about it. So I like to talk about industrial space in general, and then from there we can do a deep dive into what this niche asset class is. Now, as many people who might have heard or read or learned about industrial asset class, is there are three subclasses in industrial. One, there is the manufacturing. These are big spaces where you do heavy manufacturing or light manufacturing. The second one is what you have, these big warehouses or distribution facilities or logistics as they call them, right? Like you think about your big Amazon warehouses. That's what a warehouse is. And the third is actually called the flex space. Now, flex traditionally has, when people describe flex space, traditionally it has been used to describe a space, maybe it is 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet, and is used by a tenant such as a biopharma lab, let's say. Now, what do these people want? They want offices for their lab workers, but at the same time they want a big space to house their lab. So if you think about a 10,000 square foot building, usually a single story building, and you have some space allocated to offices, and in the same building you also have this large open space where you can put whatever you want to put. Maybe it is a lab, a showroom, furniture, whatever you want to do. That kind of a building has traditionally been called a flex space, and anything under 25,000 square feet is what has been referred to as flex space. Then now we talk now I can start talking about what we mean by the multi-tenant flex space. Now, this is a niche within a niche. It's a niche within the flex space. What we're talking about here are these buildings. Typically, any building, and usually it is a single story building, it has some combination of warehouse space and office or retail space, and is under 12,000 square feet, 10 or 12,000 square feet. And then you take that 10,000 square feet and you subdivide it into smaller spaces, anywhere from 1,000 to say 2,500 square feet. So let's say you have a 10,000 square foot building, you subdivided it into 2,000 square foot units. Now, each of those units will have a small office, a restroom, and then the rest of the 80% of the space is usable as a warehouse, storage, or even doing for some kind of light assembly. That's what a typical multi-tenant flex space unit looks like. So now, in the past, all these buildings have been 100% metal, prefabricated metal buildings. But now, as cities want them to look a little nicer, we are having to put, brick or masonry facade on them. And so from the outside, they actually look very much like an office space. Now, there's one way you can distinguish multi-tenant flex space is by the existence of a bay door or a roll-up door. Now, usually it is about 14 to 16 feet high, a roll-up door, so that a big truck can roll directly into the space, and it is at ground level, at grade level. And when you see that, either at the front or the back of the building, that usually signals that it is a multi-tenant flex space. That is the distinguishing characteristic of these flex spaces.
Got it. So let's then, you're taking a space that's 10 or 12,000 square foot. You're dividing it up into smaller spaces. It's a large piece of warehouse, and it may have an office in it, and it's going to have a large bay door for a truck to be able to enter. How small typically can the units go? What would be the lower end of that?
The minimum I have seen other developers do is 1,000 square foot, which in my personal opinion is too little, too less. And the reason I say that is, if you think about the typical tenant who moves into these spaces, they are upgrading from a smaller space, which is typically their garage. And so when you're going from, say, a 500 or 600 square foot garage in your own house, you don't want to go from 500 square foot to just 1,000 square foot. That's just not enough if you're growing your business. So I have seen developers do 1,000 square foot, but typically the average, what we have seen, and which makes the most money for the developer and is useful for the tenant as well, is somewhere between 1,600 to 1,800 square foot. Now, there are people who build it as big as 2,500 square feet too. Mm-hmm. But you will see when we do the math, in most areas of the country, anywhere between 1,600 to 1,800 is kind of the sweet spot, which is a nice a balance between usability for the tenant and at the same time getting a good lease rate on your individual units. Perfect. And so if you take a typical space of about 1,650 square feet, about 250 to 300 square feet of that will be a one or two offices, a front office, and then there'll be a restroom as well. Now, why do we call them flex space? Is because you have all this remaining space that you are allowed, are able to use as warehouse or manufacturing floor. But if you are a business where you actually had more need for an office space, we could extend your office space. We could make your office double the size of your office from 250 square feet to 500 square feet. Yes, it would mean that you would have less of a warehouse space, but if that's what your business needs, we can do that very easily for them. And so that's where the term flex space really comes from. It's the flexibility, the versatility of this space. Whether you need a little more office space or you need a lot less office space, whether you need the high ceilings to put your equipment in there, whether you need to go from one unit to two units, the adjoining unit, we can do that. So just the flexibility of being able to co-locate both your office space and your warehouse space in the same location, and being able to expand or downgrade as needed, is what gives them, it makes them very attractive to tenants, of different kinds of small businesses.
All right. So Deepak, when determining the square footage of these units, what's the lowest threshold of square footage that these units can be? And what's kind of the optimal square footage?
Sure, sure. So when you take a 10,000 square foot metal building, I've seen people subdivide them into units as small as 1,000 square foot and get 10 units out of them. I've seen people do 4 units at 2,500 square feet each. Now, there are pros and cons of going either way, and I'll discuss them. So when you go to 1,000 square feet, that's a that's very little space, which usually means you're probably going to get about 250 square feet of office, and then about 750 square feet of warehouse space. In my opinion, that's too less for a tenant who is going upgrading from their home garage for their business. Now, if you think about a typical home garage in the US, might be say 500 square feet. So there's no value in a business going from 500 square feet of warehouse space in their house garage to a 750 square foot warehouse space in my multi-tenant flex space project. So I tend to think 1,000 square feet is very too little for most small businesses. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the 2,000 square feet, 2,500 square feet, even 5,000 square feet I've seen. Now, these are great for big tenants who need that space. And I'm always happy when, when, when I'm doing my project, I'm still building, and some tenant comes along and says, "Hey, I need 5,000 square feet." I'm happy to give them 5,000 square feet. Always, because it's one tenant, you've taken up a lot of space, easy to manage, all the rental rate is also great, so I'm happy to do that. But if I had to subdivide my spaces, we tend to find that there's a great balance which is achieved between usability for the tenants and a good lease rate for yourself as a tenant, or as a landlord or developer. And it happens around that 1,600 to 1,800 square feet. I find that to be an ideal and optimum size of one of these units. In a 1,650 square foot space, you will get about 300 square feet of office, including your restroom, and that still leaves you more than 1,000 square feet, close to 1,400 square feet of warehouse space that you can use for light assembly, light manufacturing, whatever or inventory, whatever you need to. I think that's enough space for a lot of businesses to be happy with. And so I find, and then also on the other end, from a developer or landlord perspective, the lease rates that you can get for these spaces is anywhere from $13 to $16 gross, and that justifies the cost of developing these. The reason people tend to go lower than that, 1,200, 1,000 square feet, is because the lesser the space, the higher the lease rate. And so I can see they're trying to get a better bang for their buck. But in the long term, from a tenant perspective, it is not as usable, and you'll have a little more turnover because of that. If there's not additional space that they can buy or lease next in the next unit.
Got it. So you're saying optimal square footage is around 1,600 to 1,800, which allows you to have a little more than 1,000, maybe 1,003 or 400 square foot of kind of warehouse space, and then still another 300 square foot office. And for the listener, a typical 2-car garage is maybe around 500 square foot. So if you picture two 2-car garages together, that's around 1,000. So that's maybe the kind of size of these spaces, are a little bit bigger in this case, in addition to having the office.
Visual. Yeah, that's a great
So
visual for anybody listening. Yes.
Deepak, so who is renting these spaces? What are the types of tenants? Who's your typical tenant, and what are they using them for?
Okay, so this is where flex space excites me. I'm always about helping other entrepreneurs grow and expand their businesses. I like entrepreneurs who are starting new businesses. And let me answer that question using the story of a new business. Let's assume a stay-at-home mom decides to start a candle making business, right? Candles are very popular, different kinds of scents and all this, so it's a great business to start nowadays. Let's say they start a candle making business, and to start with, they're making the candles at home, they're selling it to friends at neighborhood markets, things like that, right? They may be doing a little bit of online sales on Shopify, whatnot. But when they start, they don't really need that much space. They're probably using one of their spare bedrooms, maybe doing a little bit of work in their garage. But then you come to the point, if the business starts picking up and they start becoming more and more successful, now you're talking about a situation where now you have to hire a first employee, a second employee, you need helpers. And then being able to manage this business from your home kind of becomes a little awkward, right? You need more space. So now you had about 500 square foot of your garage space, you need more space. So where do you go? And if traditionally, if you went back 20 years ago, the only options you would have is to go to one of these flex spaces, and these would be like 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet. And the lease rate would be like $10, $6, something like that. It's unaffordable for an early stage business who is not yet sure of how big this business is going to scale to. So they just want to go from their garage to a little bigger space so that they can get a better foot holding on their business. And that's where a flex space serves them perfectly. So this candle making business, they can go to one of our flex spaces. You'll get about 1650 square foot of total space, and the lease rate will be anywhere from $12 a square foot to $16 a square foot, depending on what part of the country you're talking about. And so for about 2,000 to 2,500 $2,500 a month, you have access to one or two offices, and you have more than 1,200 square feet of warehouse space where you can do your assembly, melting your wax and things like that, putting packaging and all that. So that's enough space now for you to be able to run your business, bring employees in, give them a space there where they feel like, yes, it is an actual business that I'm working for. And that gives them a good a foothold in the marketplace. Then let's say they went online on Amazon, right? And then they had a great offering on Amazon, and the store and the business just explodes, right? Everybody wants these candles. So in this case, what does this stay at home, once upon a time a stay at home mom, now who is a candle entrepreneur, do? Now she needs more space because she needs to fulfill all these orders which are pouring out of Amazon. So what do? If they needed more space, they don't have to relocate to a different business place. All they could do is rent one of the adjoining spaces, right? And so that way they are still co-located in the same space. There's no interruption to the business. You can expand in the same facility, and your rent actually probably goes down because you're now leasing more space. And now, since you have more employees, you also need a little more office space. And if your landlord is as friendly as we are, they might help you build a little more space, office space in that entire unit for you. So, but let's look at the other scenario. Let's say, after renting the space, the flex space, the business is not doing so well, right? And you think, okay, you know what? I actually was happier running my business from my home. I just want to get out of this lease. Now, guess what? A lot of these flex spaces have very flexible lease terms. When you sign up, especially for a new development, you can get a lease for as little as 12 months. Now, typically they are usually 3 years to 5 years, but if you were a little skeptical, when you rented, you probably signed up for a 1 year lease, and that 1 year is now up. You realize you actually don't need that much space. You're happier running your business from your home. You can just end your lease, finish your lease, and just move out. So this is the power of flex spaces, and how it helps businesses in different stages of their life cycle, depending on what their need is, expansion or downgrade. It helps them. Now, to answer your second question, which is like typically what kind of tenants do we see? We see all kinds of tenants. But if I were to put them in a category, I would describe them as local service based businesses, small businesses, local service based small businesses. Now these include your small businesses as plumbers, electricians, HVAC guys, roofers, pool service companies, landscape designers, auto detailing, window tinting, appliance repair, pest control, Comcast installers, and contractors. We've even had brewers doing their small business in these flex spaces. You have artists; they need a bigger space. They need a studio. You have cabinet makers, small furniture makers. So the breadth of who can use these flex spaces is just so diverse, and that's what makes this space so attractive. That if one part of the economy is not doing as great, no problem, some other part of the economy might be doing okay, and they might be needing those spaces. They are so versatile to be usable by any kind of businesses, and they can scale up, they can scale down. It's just a perfect product for any local service based small business.
That's fantastic. It sounds like there's a definitely a need and a problem that you're solving, which is small businesses that need more space than their garage, but don't want to rent a 5,000 or $10,000 square foot place, and they can't afford that at that stage in their business. But it gives them enough space that they can, assemble their products, store their inventory, have an office, have room for their employees there as well, and at an affordable rate. And as far as price point, just to piece together what you were saying, you said, and depending on the market, the rent may be around $15 a square foot. So at 1,000 square foot, that's $1,500 a month. And, if it's 1,500 square foot, you're looking at a little over $2,000 a month. So I just want to piece that together for the listener to get an idea of what that looks like for the small business renting that space. And then the second part of what you were saying is the types of tenants. And you pointed out that there's just a wide variety of small businesses, service-based small businesses that you can rent to. And that's a great thing for you. And it shows the demand for these spaces, and also just the diversity of tenants, and that you're not dependent on a certain sector. There's always going to be a need for this. There's always people who need to assemble products, to store inventory, even if it's, an e-commerce based business. So thanks for that. And then the next piece I'd like to just touch on is, what does it look like managing a property like this? So I imagine you're going to have a lot of tenants, kind of beside each other. What does managing a multi-tenant flex space look like?
The short answer is not much. And I'll explain that, I'll elaborate on that. But let me walk you through the leasing strategy when it comes to new development. Now, we do not actually go through leasing brokers to lease our first generation tenants. And the reason for that is twofold. One is leasing brokers are expensive. You're going to pay 66% commission on that. And so when you're talking about, a nominal lease, or your monthly lease is is probably $2,000, $2,500 on that. It's a substantial chunk to give away 6% as commission. And the second reason, which is rather more important, is what we have discovered is our potential tenants are social media users. Now, if we think about the stay-at-home mom who started the candle business, she's a user of social media. Your plumbers, electricians, the HVAC guys, they are on social media. So we have a direct window of opportunity to be talking directly to these potential tenants, and we capitalize on that. So when we are in the pre-leasing space phase, we run social media campaigns targeting these people, and we invite them directly to contact and work with us and figuring out the lease through us. These leases are very straightforward. It's directly for the end user. You don't need to, involve any kind of tenant rep. Very standard leases. And so we use, virtual assistants to run these social media campaigns, to do the outreach, set up appointments. And so during the initial part, all you need is somebody who's on site during some part of the day to be able to show the space. We do video walkovers, so people who can't, get away from their business, they can just watch a video walkthrough. We can do a FaceTime, show them the space, or FaceTime. So that allows us to basically shortcut this whole traditional leasing process that has been in place, and we directly go to the tenant, to the consumer. Now, once the space is fully leased out, the ongoing management is also very low key, because one, these spaces are brand new, so there's literally nothing which breaks, and so we don't have to spend any money on maintenance. And then even if something broke, it is usually covered by warranty, by the subcontractors, and so they come and fix it right away. But if you think about the spaces itself, these are not complicated buildings. These are very simple spaces. The only two complicated items in a flex space are your restroom and the roll-up door. Apart from that, literally there's nothing much that you can break, that can go wrong. And so when it comes to managing these properties, they are so low-key, so hands-off, that even a big project which has, say, 40 or 50 tenants, you probably only need one handyman on call, not even on site, just on call, to be able to go and take a look at things quickly. That's really what you need. You don't need a dedicated employee to be taking care of these places. Mm-hmm. And as far as the leasing is concerned, as I said, the ongoing leases, we use social media, and we use our own in-house virtual assistants to be able to manage the leasing process.
Okay, great. So you're using social media for the leasing process, and the management itself is not very intensive because the buildings are very simple, right? It's pretty much a big garage is one way to think about it, or warehouse, with a half bathroom and maybe some office space. And you're using social media, and I imagine, the fact that they're in such high demand also gives you that power to use social media, because when enough people see that, there's going to be people out there who want to rent it. And then it sounds like you're using some automation systems and process, virtual assistants, to kind of do schedule showings and that sort of thing. So that makes sense. So can you tell us a little bit about the current project you're working on, to the extent you're able to or feel comfortable doing that? Any sort of scope on what it is you're currently working on and what the goal is for that project?
No, absolutely. I'm very comfortable talking about my current project. So right now I'm developing a flex space project in Rockwall, and this is an eastern suburb of Dallas. It's located in Rockwall County. Now, Rockwall County, for people from Texas might be aware, is the the wealthiest county in the entire state of Texas. It's a small county, but it's one of the richest. And I was able to procure land for a very good price in a great location, and I'm very excited about this project because um, the demographic nature of the city lends very well to the tenants I'm hoping to attract. Rockwall is known for having a lot of these service space small businesses owners living in Rockwall, and that is exactly the tenant profile that I would attract to my flex space project. So in terms of size and scale, this is a good mid-size project, I would say. It's about 6 acres of light industrial land, and we're going to build about 70,000 square feet on that space. Each building is going to be 5,000 square feet, and it's subdivided into three. And so each unit is going to be around 1650 square feet. Now, we are going to do this in phases. So probably in 2 or maybe 3 phases is how the development is planned for. And that is in keeping in mind the current economic environment. You want to manage your risk as a developer, and so then one of the ways you do that is you phase your projects out. In terms of the financial, the entire project we are estimating is going to cost about $8.5 million. That's the entire cost of the project, includes your land costs, your hard costs, soft costs, carry costs, all of that, all in. So which translates to about $120 a square foot to build. Now, this seems to be a little bit on the higher side. Typically in the Dallas market, you should anticipate to build anywhere from 90 to $110 a square foot. And so when you talk about why my project is costing me $120 a square foot, the answer lies in the kind of role the city and the zoning plays. Cities have different kind of rules on how these flex space projects need to look, and how they need to be retrofitted inside, and that tends to add costs to your construction. And Rockwall itself is kind of a difficult place to build anything new in. It tends to have a reputation like that in the Dallas market. So of that 8.5 million, we are raising currently in the process of raising money. The equity portion is going to be somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million, and then we are hoping to finance the rest with construction debt, interest only construction debt. So right now I'm actively in the process of raising equity of at least 2.5 to 3 million. I'm putting a lot of my own personal wealth into this project, but as you know, David, like real estate is a team game, and the more people you can bring along, it's better outcome for everybody. And I'm in the long game for this, where I just don't want to just do one project and be done. I'm in this business to develop 10 of these projects, 10 such projects in the next 5 years. That's my goal in the next 5 years, and that requires me to work with people, build a team, bring people along on my projects.
Yeah,
And
no, I think that's really
in terms
important.
of yes, in terms of like, so we've done a little bit of pro forma and underwriting for this project, and we are anticipating for these equity investors who come in early, the returns over a 4-year period. That's the anticipated timeline of this project is going to be closer to about 25% IRR, or are we returning about 2 to 2.5 times their money in 4 years. That's the kind of returns which are on the table for investors.
All right, so Deepak, you mentioned it's a team sport in development and really in commercial real estate is what I found as well. So can you touch on the different kind of business partners, team members, whatever you want to call it, the people and the roles that are involved in developing a project like this and getting it from start to finish?
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, let's take a few minutes to walk through a typical project, the entire life cycle, and then all the stakeholders who are involved and all the people whom you need help from to have a successful project. The first stage of any development project is locating land, right? Now, this is where you as a developer need to have an in tune knowledge of what is going on in your local market. If you happen to be living, let's say, in the Houston market or the Dallas market, you need to know what areas of your metroplex are growing. Where is it that people are building new houses? Where is that people are moving? And the reason I say that is why that is important is that is your gauge on potential demand. That is where your new tenants are going to come from. You want to be building flex space in growth areas. If population of a particular town or county is growing, say a percent, 2% a year, that's explosive growth. And once a region is growing like that, there will be insatiable demand for flex space in that market. So you want to identify that marketplace first. And you might be locally self-aware, but it's really important that you connect with some of the top dealing land brokers in your market, develop those relationships with them, and identify which particular submarkets in your market is where you should be developing a project. So land brokers, your commercial brokers who are in the commercial space that has that innate knowledge and can source land for you is your very important and critical partner. They Location can kill a project, but it can elevate a project as well. If you get the location wrong, you're doomed from the start. So you want to make sure that you get that part exactly right. The next phase is the what I like to call the pre-development or the entitlement phase. Now this is where you now have procured the land, you've closed on the land, and you want to start building on it. Now before you can do that, you have to go through the pre-development, the pre-due diligence process. This is where your lead architect comes into play. Now you want to find an architect who understands this asset class and has built projects like that beforehand. Now, granted, these are not difficult buildings to build, but what you still want to maximize and be efficient on is utilization of your land. You want to build as much square footage as possible on a particular parcel, and this is where your architect is going to help you. And so if you identify architects who've done this before, it helps you a lot. And they're going to help you with a lot of the due diligence as well, whether it is surveys, whether it is detention rates, access to the road, your utilities. They're going to identify all those things, and they're going to lay out a project for you, and they're going to tell you exactly how much building coverage you can get out of a particular parcel. Now, a good rule of thumb is every acre of land is going to yield about 10,000 to 12,000 square foot. If you're not able to build that much, it's probably not going to be a profitable project as a developer for yourself and for your investors. So you want to get at least about anywhere between 25 to 35% building coverage, and that's what would make the project profitable. So once you've done the pre-development part, which is where all your soft costs are being spent, you're going to pay your architect, you're going to pay your civil engineer, your all these folks to get the designs approved. Now, one other aspect which you have to keep in mind is the architect. Not only they need to be good at, at their at their job of actually providing the design, but also working with the city. Now, um, and that's very important, especially when you're working with cities which have a reputation for being difficult to work with. So that's when the relationships with folks on in the city hall come into play. If you have an architect who's been working in an area for the past 20 years and has built many projects, they probably know everybody on this in the city hall by name, by first name basis, and that's exactly the kind of person you want to hire for your project, because they are going to be able to get you those variances when you need them, and they are going to be able to get your project approved faster. They're going to be able to get your permits pulled faster. They are also probably going to know the next important partner that you need in your project, which are the general contractors. They are going to help you bid out your project to general contractors, and I typically advise you need to get at least 3 if not 5 bids from different general contractors, and then have them itemize the whole building process, and pick not based on just cost, but how you feel, whether they are easy to work with, are they reliable, dependable. Now this is where, after the first big mistake you can make with a project is getting the wrong location with the wrong zoning. Once you have gone on that, the next important phase where you can make, there's a lot of scope for mistakes, is your construction phase. Now granted, yes, these are simpler buildings, but you want a general contractor who's going to be on top of things and not make the big huge mistakes. Now, any construction involved in any kind of development, there will be mistakes. That's a given. You cannot have a perfect project. Nobody has a perfect project. What you don't want are these major projects which are going to blow your construction budget. Now, when we do underwriting, about 75 to 80% of your total project cost is your hard cost, which is being spent by a general contractor. So they are, in a way, responsible for spending 80% of your entire project money. And so you better find somebody who's reliable, dependable, and has high integrity and can get their job done in a timely fashion. Yes, there'll be delays here and there. You build for that in your underwriting, in your modeling, and you hope for the best. Like, mistakes will be made and they'll have to be reversed. They'll have to pay for it out of their own pocket, but you just don't want them to make big mistakes. Then once the building is about to be ready, that's when your pre-leasing starts. This is one of the easiest phases, I think. Using the strategy that I outlined earlier, the social media, to go directly to tenants. This is where we tend to use our in-house team of virtual assistants to start pre-leasing and doing our social media campaigns. You probably still need like some kind of a superintendent on site to be able to show the spaces. The last one is probably the most has the biggest outcome on the returns for your investors, which is the sale of the asset. Now here again, you need to have those relationships with your brokers, the commercial brokers, who can market your project to institutional investors. Now here's where I like to, why it explains why we build mid-sized projects, anything above 40,000 square feet. The reason is, when you build anywhere between 40 or above 40,000 square feet is when you start to attract institutional buyers for your project. Now these buyers are easier to deal with. They pay the top dollar, and that's the kind of buyer you want to sell into. You don't want to be selling your project into a mom and pop shop or a high net worth individual. Usually that's a little more involved process. You probably not might going to get the best price possible. And so you want to build at a scale that is attractive to your institutional buyer. And so you want to build something above, I'm going to say 50,000 square feet. That's where it gets attractive for them. That's where it is big enough for these investors to come in and buy the project. And so those are the five different projects. So in terms of importance, I would say your your land brokers who are helping you find the deal, and your general contractor, they are the biggest partners. And then of course the architect. These are the major stakeholders in a successful project.
Perfect. Sounds good. First, there was just two terms you mentioned that I want to make sure we explain for our listeners: hard costs versus soft costs. Can you break those down quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So soft cost is any cost which is spent on items which doesn't go on the ground. A good example is the architect. Now, architect is spending his time and your money on giving you a design. He's working with a civil engineer, he's pulling permits, but on the ground, none of that money has been spent. So that gets classified. Any money which is spent on things which are not visible on your ground is classified as soft cost. Any money which is spent on things which is actually physically visible on your land is classified as a hard cost. So that would mean that would include laying down the concrete, the parking, the landscaping, the site work, the electrical, the mechanical, your doors, windows, anything which is physical and you can touch and it goes on your ground, on the ground, is hard cost. Anything to do with labor, knowledge work, fees of any kind that you might have to pay to the city, to your architect, and things like that. That's all classified as soft cost.
Perfect. And then I want to recap again. I believe you said there were the 5 phases of development. So, and help me through these. I believe the first one is site selection. Is that right?
Yes.
And then you have pre-development, where you're working with the city to make sure you can do what you want to do there.
Yep.
Then you have the design, the architecture, the architect putting together the design of the project. Then you have construction, and then you have leasing out. Is that right, or is there any correction there?
Pre-development includes working with the architect with the design and planning.
Okay.
And the zone and working with the city.
Got it.
Usually, the architect is your quarterback on working with the city, and so an architect is going to take you from your boundary survey, which is your first document that you get, and then getting you all the way to pulling your construction permits, and basically to the point where now you can actually put a shovel in the ground. So that's the role of the architect, and that whole process of starting from a land on now that you own, and the boundary survey to getting you the permits, that's the pre-development space. So that's the second phase. The third one is the actual construction. The fourth one is the leasing, and the fifth one is the sale or the disposition.
Perfect. Now, for me, the kind of most fear I would have in this kind of development, or most risk I would see, is in purchasing the land and essentially getting approval from the city to do what it is you want to do. When you're buying this land, is most of that built into the due diligence phase? Or how do you assess and manage that risk? And when you buy and close on the purchase of that land, do you already have kind of, some contingent approval from the city of being able to build what you want? Of course, you're still going to have to submit drawings, but do you have a pretty high degree of confidence of being able to build what it is you want to do?
Yes, absolutely. And so that's all called the pre-due diligence. And so once you put a land under contract, usually you will have anywhere from 60 to 120 days to do your due diligence, or also called the option period, here in Texas. That's a time where you're basically uh, going through a fine tooth comb and making sure that this is going to be a viable project. It's going to make money for everybody involved, and the city likes it, and you know it can be built in a way that you like it and your tenants would like it. So
Mm.
that's when you're going through everything, asking all the questions to the city. um, a simple question like, okay, there might be a water line, there might be a water line, next to your land parcel, and you might think, okay, already I have, great, I have water. But here's what an architect is going to ask the city: is there enough capacity in that water line for me to build a 50,000 square foot project? The second question, other
Mm-hmm.
questions like, power. I want to give three-phase power, 200 amps to each unit. Is there enough
Mm-hmm.
capacity near my site? So these are questions which are being asked of the city and the utility companies and whoever else is involved. And you want all those answers and a plan figured out before you want to close on the land. There's no point
Got it.
in actually purchasing a land where you have these constraints and you cannot build what you want to build. It's not going to be a profitable project. So you use that option period, the 90-day period or the 120-day period, to basically dot all your i's and cross all your t's, and your architect is your biggest partner on that adventure. And yes, sometimes you discover things about a parcel which makes it unviable to continue the project, and you have to just cancel the contract and not purchase the land. And you did spend some money doing that during that period. um, and that's basically a sunk cost. That's one of the risks that you take on as a developer, that not every parcel that you locate is going to translate into a project. If you get a hit ratio of 1 in
Sure.
2, I think you're doing very good. If you're doing something like 1 in 3, I think you're still that's pretty normal too.
Sure. Okay. Perfect. So you are able to do a lot of that due diligence and kind of verification in that option period before you close on the land. So that's good to know.
Yes.
Um, well, Deepak, I could probably continue and talk with you about this stuff for another, an hour or two because it's so interesting to me. Um, but I do want to kind of wrap up and you know close out what we're talking about here. But before we do that, can can you just talk a little bit about, one of our aspects of the show is kind of mindset and having a success mindset. Can you talk about what it takes to be successful in terms of the mindset, the beliefs, the attitude in doing what it is you're doing and taking on kind of, high risk projects and, raising money, all of that kind of stuff. What would you say is the mindset needed to be successful to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm a big believer in the growth mindset. You know, failure is just a stepping stone to your next success. And so any obstacles that you come across, they're good. I look forward to them because that just gets me closer to my success. That's the attitude I have. Um, and starting a development can be frustrating because you're trying to locate land and you come across a lot of listings. Somebody sends you a listing and you get all excited about it, and you start doing your pre due diligence, and you find out a few things about it, and then like, oh, it's not going to work, and you have to move on to the next one. So it's kind of a little bit like dating. And you'll have some heartbreak along the way, but you just keep chugging along, because if you just keep marching, you want to get there. And as far as risk is concerned, yes, development, any kind of ground up development is risky inherently by nature. you're betting against time. You're taking a bet that what I think is going to happen in 3 years, and nobody here holds a crystal ball to be able to tell you that. So it is inherently risky because of that aspect, but there are ways to control that risk, to manage that risk. Now there's this talk about an upcoming recession, or the economic environment not being so great. I look at it as a recession it just means a decrease in demand. It doesn't mean a complete elimination of demand. And so my thought process is, all right, there's going to be less demand from consumers, from small businesses. And so what does that mean to my project as a developer? It means that I need to build slowly so that I can absorb this lower demand, and I need to work with that. And so that's why the project that I'm undertaking right now, I'm going to build it phase one. Phase one is going to be probably about only 20,000 square feet. And then we'll take a reassessment of what the economic situations are and how the leasing is going, and then proceed with that. So having a mindset that come what may, I figure it out, right? That is what you need as a developer. Things will go wrong, but if you tell yourself, I will figure it out. I don't know what I need to figure out in 1 year's time. I still don't know. There'll be challenges, but you put a lot of faith in your ability and surround yourself with people who have more experience or more diverse experiences than you. Then when the situation arises, you will come up with an answer. And that's all you need to be a developer. Be comfortable with risk and have a lot of faith, blind faith essentially, in your ability to figure things out as you go.
That's perfect. I love that. So growth mindset is one thing you mentioned. Failure is a stepping stone, surrounding yourself with other people more experienced than you, and just having and knowing the faith that you'll get through this, you'll figure it out. And at the end of the day, you make it happen. Well, Deepak, thank you so much for this conversation today. Thank you for being so generous with your knowledge and your experience and sharing that all with us. You really broke down a lot of the multi-tenant flex market for our listeners, as well as gave our listeners a very good overview of what development looks like and the stages of that and the people required to make that happen. So thank you so much for coming on the show. We were thrilled to have you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure speaking to your listeners. And if anybody, wanted to reach out and talk to me and wanted me to expand on certain things or they may just make a personal connection, they feel free to reach out to me. You can go to my website. It's called flexspacebusinessparks.co, or just do a Google search for my name, and then it should show up. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can follow our social media profiles. They're all by the name of FlexSpace Business Parks. So if you just do a Google search for that name, we are probably number one on that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Deepak. And for the listeners, we will include in the show notes everything that Deepak mentioned, his website, his social media, his LinkedIn. And for our listeners, that's all for today. And until next time.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.